Okay, can everybody hear me well? Okay, super. So my name is Olivier Jacquet. I am responsible in Schneider Electric for business development of access to energy. And the topic of this conference is how we can provide access to energy for all. So we are gathering, and I'm very honored to welcome all our panelists. So Patricia Benchena, head of the Schneider Foundation. Rick Stamhuis, who is the CEO of a startup based in Madagascar in Eastern Africa. We have Yolanda van Griekel, who is representing the IKEA Foundation. And last but not least, we have William Brent, representing Power for All. Okay, so just for me to depict or describe a little bit the overall situation, some of you may not be familiar with this access to energy stakes that the world is facing. A couple of numbers, not too many. Out of the 7 billion people that live on Earth today, 3 billion have very poor access to energy, meaning that they have access, but with technologies that are harming their health. I can give example. For example, people living in Africa in small cities, they have to use candles to get light at home. They are cooking with firewood, which is harming their health because most of the time they don't have a proper chimney, so the smoke is all around in their home. And they are absolutely not knowledgeable of what's existing in the market that could replace the technologies that they are using and that is harming their health. Examples of products that we are launching during this Innovation Summit. This is a solar lantern. You can simply charge it with a solar panel, and you see you can get a point of light. Not only you can get a point of light, you can also charge a mobile phone thanks to a USB you find here. Okay. That product is worth $10, selling price, street price. And I would like to compare with the average income of an African family in rural area, $200 per year. Not so much, not a surprise. What is surprising is out of this $200 per year income per family, 30%, which is $60 is spent on energy. You would say, wow, they spend 30% of their energy, of their income on energy. Nobody, I guess, in this place is spending that amount of percentage on energy. At most you spend 5%, 4%, 3%. Those guys spend 30%. So $60 represents 30% of their income. They could buy 6 lamps like this, which will last for 5 years. Instead of using candles, kerosene lamps. Okay? So this is just to give you a small example, some numbers. You may be aware that United Nations has taken the lead on this topic. They have defined a couple of years ago 17 sustainable development goals, of which number 7 is provide sustainable access to energy for all. And there's a lot of work. Because as I said, 3 billion people have poor access to energy. 1 billion on Earth have no access at all to electricity. Okay. So today, I'm going to now turn to the panelists. Providing access to electricity is not only about technologies or products. It's about ecosystem also. How do we make sure in those rural areas people are properly trained, people are properly knowledgeable on what's happening, what are the technologies available, or what they can do to improve the situation. So I would like maybe to give the ground first to both William and Patricia to speak more about the ecosystem, training initiatives that are being done currently, trying to tackle this issue of access to energy. Maybe Patricia, I'll let you start.
Okay, thank you to give me the floor. So I represent the Schneider Electric Foundation here, and we work very closely with the team of Access to Energy. Indeed, in 2008, when we decided at Schneider Electric globally to tackle the energy access, we have also decided to move the ambition of the foundation to as a contribution to this program, tackling the need of education in this field. Because as you mentioned, of course, when we have solutions, when we create also an ecosystem with investment fund that we have at Schneider Electric to invest in solutions, but also in channels to the market, in the field, you need also people capable to maintain, to size the solutions. So this is what we have chosen to tackle with the foundation, and we contribute to vocational training in emerging countries, mainly, supporting training center with training from 3 months to 3 years. And our objective by 2025 is to contribute to train 1 million people. So it's a very ambitious program that we have. It is the most powerful program supported by the foundation. And to date, we have contributed to train already 200,000 people. So still room to go for us. But I'd like to mention also another challenge related to low-income people and energy that we invest in with the foundation is energy poverty in Europe. Because you mentioned that on an average, people spend 30% in Africa on energy bills.
Yes.
And in Europe now, there is this increasing phenomenon of energy poverty. And we consider, even though there is no official definition around energy poverty, that you're energy poor when you spend more than 10% of your income in your bills. So not only you're poor, but you have also difficulty to pay your bills and also to benefit from the right comfort that you should have in your home, because you also your housing solutions is not so good. So this is about all what we do at the foundation on this topic.
Thank you very much, Patricia. And maybe, William, it would be interesting to get your insight on why is it important to train electricians in rural areas, and how powerful all is helping. And definitely Schneider needs partnerships. There's no way we can do this alone.
Yeah, thank you, Olivier. And just a quick introduction about Power for All. We are an NGO, and our main purpose is to represent the interests of what we call the decentralized renewable energy sector. So these are solutions like the lantern that Olivier showed you. It's also solar home systems, rooftop solar panels that are put on people's homes, rooftops, as well as things called mini-grids, which you all are, I'm sure, aware of, since Schneider does containerized mini-grids. So, these solutions are an alternative to the main grid. In many of the communities that we're talking about, they're rural, they're remote, they're far from the grid, and the possibility that the grid will ever reach them in any near-term time frame is unlikely. And so, given that that's the situation, there's a much larger role that decentralized renewable energies can and should play. And that's our function, is to really try and provide an enabling environment in the countries to scale these types of solutions, that people can get access to electricity much more quickly, more affordably, and not just to provide lighting, but also to provide appliances for productive purposes, for improving livelihoods, etc. So, the interesting thing for us is that, on with the help of the Schneider Electric Foundation, very generous support, we launched something called Powering Jobs, which was really trying to take the other side of the coin of skills and training. So if you think about skills and training, what's the end goal of skills and training? Is to have people employed, right? And many of the skills needed to deploy these types of systems don't exist today. And so the work that Schneider Electric is doing to provide that skills and training is an important part of a broader effort that needs to happen to create the people that are needed to actually deliver these solutions. But oftentimes, in order to get the resources to do even more, to achieve that million person training goal, you need resources from governments and the supporters of those governments. And it's difficult to get that unless they see the other side of the coin, which is job creation. So in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, you have 13 million youth coming into the job market each year. Only 3 million of those youth actually find jobs. So there's a huge unemployment crisis right now in sub-Saharan Africa, as well as parts of South and Southeast Asia. And at the same time, there's a huge opportunity for job creation from the energy sector to actually employ those youth in rural communities, not just from the delivery of energy, but actually within the communities that are gaining access to that energy, there's also a huge job creation potential. So we started something called the Powering Jobs campaign to put a face to the job creation potential from the energy access sector. And so we then are using that evidence and data that we're gathering to go to governments and say, hey, here's a great opportunity for you to increase job creation in rural communities, but only if you increase the support for skills and training. So I think, the way that we're working is very important, this partnership, so that you are actually delivering on the skills and training, and while we are at the same time communicating and educating governments that this is a huge job creation opportunity for them and helps them achieve their development goals.
Thank you very much, William, to bring your testimony on this very key topic. Now let me give the room to Yolanda. Yolanda, you are representing IKEA Foundation. IKEA is one of the most active foundations to fight against energy poverty and energy access. Could you tell us in a few words, what IKEA is doing, and what do you foresee are areas of possible collaboration between Schneider and IKEA to help this take?
Yes, thank you very much. So I think most of you are probably aware with IKEA as a retailer or as a brand. But I'm sitting here as a representative of IKEA Foundation, which is basically the philanthropic arm of that retail organization. And thank you, Olivier, that you actually said that we're one of the larger foundations in this field. But I don't think we have been really communicating largely about that. So if we talk about energy, we actually don't talk about light or products as such. We talk about energy as an enabler for other developments. So for example, if you would take that solar lantern that's there, without that lantern you couldn't, for example, study if you don't have electricity at night. But actually energy can play a much larger role in that as well. So, for example, energy can actually empower women. It can contribute to safer situations. It can actually develop more economic health. So, for example, we are looking at IKEA Foundation really stimulating livelihood opportunities. And when I say that, I talk about, for example, incomes going up, but also jobs being created. And at the same time, carbon going down, because IKEA as a brand is committed to 100% renewables. So in the introduction, it was already said that a lot of people worldwide actually use energy sources that are damaging their health, but also the environment. So that's where we actually would like to play a role. And the term was already used before, this ecosystems approach. And it always sounds very complicated, but maybe to just simplify it, if we take this solar product that we see here, or a solar home system, and you're able to buy it, or maybe you're not able to buy it. How can we look at consumer finance, for example? So even people that don't have access to energy yet now, because of basically the lack of finances in order to really buy it, how can we have a smart system that actually enables them to still have access to that product and pay it back over time, for example? At the same time, if your lantern or your other product breaks down, who is there to fix it? What's the maintenance model of it? If we, for example, reach you with a product that actually gives you the energy that you need, but it's broken down after 6 months, did we achieve our goal? Do we have the impact that we want to have? Do you have access to energy actually? So that's actually the model that we're looking into. So we're looking into consumer finance, but also enterprise finance. So really see how we can stimulate local entrepreneurs, stimulate local development. Skills is an important part. It was mentioned before already. So actually really drive development. And we have been doing that in several areas. And I think one of the ones that has gotten the most attention is the work that we've done in the humanitarian space. So we've been working a lot in refugee camps, but also with host communities, which actually has the extra challenge because often these settlements are kind of stamped or branded as a temporary settlement. but we know that these camps are there on average at least 19 years. Well, 19 years, I mean, I might not be that old yet, but it's not a temporary settlement. So how can we really make sure that also these models can be applicable in, for example, refugee camps or people living in rural communities?
Thank you very much, Yolanda. Could you elaborate more on the refugee camps? What exactly did IKEA do to help provide access to energy?
So basically, since a number of years ago, we have been working closely a lot with UNHCR, so the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. And basically what we have been doing is to, first of all, look at the needs of people. So whenever we work with partners that really have the needs-based approach, as we call it. So we look at persons in the camp. What do they need? I mean, we can have a great product, but if it doesn't suit the needs of the people, I mean, people won't use it. If you give me a great product and it doesn't fulfill my needs, I won't use it either, right? So that's where it should start in our philosophy. So together with, for example, UNHCR, we have developed quite some different interventions. One that actually got a lot of attention is a power plant in the Azraq refugee camp, powering actually households with energy usage. But at the same time, it's also one of the programs where we have learned about the most. And I think that's where we like to play a unique role. I mean, we're not there for just seeing interventions implemented, but really to also share learnings on that journey. So one of the learnings, for example, in this case was we established a plan together with our partners, and we had an assumption on how much energy people would use. But it was based on, for example, phone charging or lighting. But within 2 months, I mean, all these shops suddenly arose with second-hand fridges or TVs. Those were being sold. They were not very energy efficient. So energy usage would go up dramatically. Well, that's one of the things why you should always take into account not only the current situation of people, in this case it was refugees in Azraq in Jordan, but it's people that come from, a life that any of us has now as well. So they're used to certain standards. I mean, you should always take that into account when you develop an intervention like that and look at the potential that people have. One of the things that you really saw arising there is a marketplace, for example. People started powering fridges, but actually allows them to actually sell food and earn an income by doing that. So you can see a lot of spin-off interventions actually coming from energy, and that's why we see energy as an enabler and not the end goal.
Thank you very much for this example. So here an example of a solar microgrid installed in a refugee camp. That's in Jordan. And a good example showing that once you have access to electricity, this can trigger access to water, access to security, access to economical development, access to health. And that's really the key for development. Now I'd like to turn to Rick, because Rick has a very interesting experience. I think you started your company 6 years ago, or 7 years ago?
6 years ago.
And maybe I'll let you explain, because you know more than me, but you have made a business out of charging solar lanterns to providing the first level of need of electricity for villages in Madagascar, which is Eastern Africa. Actually quite a challenge, and very curious to hear from you. How could you be successful in such an environment? And what could you say you brought to those people that you are doing business with?
Thank you so much for that question, and thank you so much also for having me today. I want to applaud you for the great accomplishments you've already achieved with the Access to Energy program.
Thank you.
We've collaborated already together. What I have done in Madagascar is started a company that makes renewable energy accessible to the people that have literally just less than $2 or maybe even less than $1 a day. And like Olivier already mentioned before, people earn about $200 on a yearly basis, and they do spend a lot of their money on energy. The problem is that they don't really notice, because it's every day that they spend like a very little amount. And the challenge often comes in that when you present them superior products, like this solar lantern, we know it's beneficial to them, but from their perspective, it's a really large sum, and it's a very great risk for them to come up with such a sum, just on the basis that in the future somewhere it's going to pay off.
So could you give examples? What's the price of a, I don't know, kerosene lamp,
Exactly.
and how much do they pay for it?
Yeah, so typically people end up using kerosene, of which some of the poorest people spend 500 ariary, which is about $5 a week. Yeah, and other people they would use candles, and a candle is 5 cents per candle. So that's what people end up spending every single day. But then we haven't spoken about the batteries that they're buying, which are often getting wasted and end up in the nature, which is also often not talked about. But my point is that for these people, like if I would show you the solar lantern, you can all understand how it's beneficial and why an investment like that is worth it. But for our customers, it's not that straightforward. But we can't blame them for it because that's what their situation is like. So we had to, as a result of that, change our model to make these great products available. So what we've done, we set up a franchise model. So we found local entrepreneurs, and we've equipped them with a solar system with which they could then start charging solar lights. And they would charge these solar lights and rent them out to people for less than they used to pay for a candle. So now you have the same customer, and you present them with a fully charged solar light, for which they have to pay less than paying a candle. So that's like what we wanted to do is just break all the barriers down, basically make it a no-brainer to switch to clean energy. And what also have been rightfully mentioned here is education. So what we've tried to do as well is to link it to education, because solar lights already on itself are linked to education because a lot of kids end up using them for studying. Other people that end up using them a lot are entrepreneurs. They use them in the morning and in the evening. And what we've done, some of these franchisees, they've actually been equipped now with a bigger solar system, so it powers a neighboring school. And I believe, like with that kind of empowerment, you bring everything together because they can't go without each other. And I think that's why it's been so amazing that you've already also have such great efforts in that area of education, because that's the long term on how to get people developed. But in a nutshell, what we've really tried to do is just to make great products, solar products, available to people that need them probably the most, and create employment while doing so. So we have, till date, 46 franchisees that on a daily basis charge 12,000 lights, and it's already a profitable company for the last 2 years.
Congratulations, that's very impressive what you've achieved. How would you qualify the change in the everyday life that you're bringing to these people with this business? And I repeat, it's a business.
Thank you. And the reason why it's a business is I believe it has to be a bottom-up movement. If the numbers that we're talking about, they're so big, it can't just be only a top-down exercise. But I believe that by combining the two, and that's why today I think like we're in a really great panel because we're approaching this from the different angles. But the reason why with the business I believe it has such great potential is that, for example, we passed by the customer by accident to eat some food, and as it turned out, this customer, can you still hear my mic by the way? It has gone off on my...
Yes, we do.
This customer started to use our light just a couple of months ago, and because of that, they had much more light. And there were a lot of taxibus, local buses, public transportation buses, passing by her restaurant. But in the past, she would never get noticed because her shop was just really dark. And with this solar light, she actually managed to attract more customers. And as a result of that, while we were visiting her restaurant, the restaurant actually had concrete walls, while in the past it had plastic walls, right? So that's just the impact of one solar light. It's just, yeah.
It's great to hear. Great to hear. Well, so we'll have time for Q&A at the end of the session. So I hope we'll have questions because there should be 10 to 15 minutes for that. Before we go to the Q&A, I'd like to hear from you. Are you more like optimistic or pessimistic regarding this objective of having full energy access till 2030? If you are optimistic, why? And pessimistic, why? It would be interesting to know why. So, Patricia, would you like to start? And I know you'll talk also about some display that we have at our
now,
booth.
I think.
Yes.
Because I just wanted to mention that we have a booth over there nearby the plenary session, and we are launching a web series called Rising Tomorrow. And it is the story, because I love figures, but I love also stories, because I think that when you see a video, someone that testify around the evolution in their life, it's even better. So you will be able to meet 4 of the students that have been through the program we propose at the foundation from Nigeria, Senegal, Brazil, and India. And you will see, I hope so, and feel that how vocational training can change their future. So this is I'm always optimistic, and so I invite you to see them and meet with them at the booth.
Okay. Is it in virtual reality, this one?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, yes, it is. So we have all the devices for you to go through this story through VR, but it is also now available on YouTube for all of you.
Thank you, Patricia. Rick?
I'm also an optimist.
Optimistic.
And I think you have to be if you want to overcome the challenges that we've had to face to date. But no, I believe there are such great developments taking place, both on the level of products, but both on also the commitment of the corporates like Schneider, and there's a really strong worldwide movement, and all these things combined together. Yeah, I believe there's great potential. I do wish that there will be more startups in Africa. I think there's still a lot of room left there, because the funds are, I think, available on a high level. But I think it will be good if more and more of these funds could make it down to local entrepreneurs that would love to buy.
And by the way, as you are an entrepreneur and you are affecting now positively 20,000 homes in Madagascar.
50,000.
50,000? Okay. What would it take, or what are the roadblocks for you to reach millions of people? Because in Madagascar, I think that's the stake. It's millions of people, not only hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And you can't do it on your own. Like it has to be through partnerships. And some of these partnerships have to be local. Like an example of that is we make our database available to microfinance institutions. So on basis of our database, our customers now can get loans through which they can then buy bigger solar systems. But also on an international level, it's really important to collaborate on this. Smaller companies, they can't get the scale often, so they end up paying higher prices. So by collaborating with great bigger companies, that can be achieved.
Thank you, Rick. So Yolanda, are you optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, by nature, I'm an optimist for sure. I think Rick actually stole a lot of my answers already. But
so sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm actually very optimistic about a number of things. So if we look at, for example, product innovation, but also business model innovation. I go to the field a lot, and just the energy, literally, that I see from people in the field. There's a lot of things going on. Sometimes they just need to have like a Kickstarter enabler in order for them to really thrive or to really grow. I also see that collaboration is very much needed on the different levels, and that's why we work with different partners. So, for example, we're a foundation only giving out grants, right? So, but really to kickstart, for example, those local entrepreneurs who work together with organizations like Sunfund or Acumen, who can provide an equity or debt capital in order to grow those businesses. At the same time, a lot of data is needed. So we work with organizations like the World Resources Institute on a higher level, but at the same time also locally with the Access to Energy Institute that really tests equipment in the field and really sees, what is the need of people and how can we really work with that. But also on a policy level, we work together, for example, with a Sustainable Energy for All. That really influence also policymakers in order to, go towards renewables, make sure that energy is integrated in policies, also on different levels, like, for example, security or health. So I'm in general very optimistic about what I see happening. Not that I would like to close with a more pessimistic note, but I would like to take the opportunity to also mention that If we talk about access to energy, we often talk about energy such as electricity. But then there's energy for cooking, and I think that's a topic that really deserves a bit more attention too. There's currently 3 billion people without modern access to cooking methods. They are cooking on open fires or on charcoal. At the same time, there's more people dying a year than on tuberculosis, malaria, and AIDS altogether. So it's a really, really big problem, but it's a problem that is not often addressed yet. So I think development in that area goes maybe rather slow. But if we just follow what happens, for example, in the solar industry, I think we can get there.
Thank you, Yolanda. Let me maybe challenge a little bit William, because we know in Africa it is forecasted that the number of people having access to energy will not move so much in the coming years, because as governments are making efforts, the demographics dynamic in Africa is such that these efforts can hardly compensate for the population growth. What do you think should be done, or what do you think we're on the right track? Are you as optimistic as your colleagues here?
So just personally, I'm an optimistic person, but I think on this topic, I'm not particularly optimistic. I think that the reality is, in fact, based on the data that we're seeing, as you say, that the number of people without electricity by the year 2030, which is when we're supposed to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 7, will be actually greater than it is today in sub-Saharan Africa. There's also very little movement on clean cooking. And I don't think we can forget that energy is a regulated industry. And so this is not just an issue of technology, it's an issue of political will and politics, and that often takes courage. It also requires the breaking down of a relationship between national governments and their funders that has existed for decades. That's oriented towards large infrastructure, big ticket items. We're talking about energy infrastructure that is distributed. It is small ticket items. It's very difficult to aggregate, and therefore due diligence to fund it and get the financing into the sector is not incentivized with the current system. So I would say that there is a huge amount of inertia in the system that still has to be removed. I think that there's a huge amount of generational resistance, I would say, within the current leadership in the energy sector. That has been trained in the traditional ways of energy provision, which have fundamentally changed over the past decade. So I think that there's a generational change that's also required. So I think that there's a lot of institutional barriers that still lay in the way of our success. I mean, there are amazing entrepreneurs, there's amazing business models, there are amazing, funders. Both the foundations on this panel are doing phenomenal work, but we still need $50 billion a year. And that's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, we sent someone to the moon for less than that. We can do this certainly in a decade. I think that there are wonderful and positive people and signs of progress, but we have a huge amount of work still yet to do. I think much of that's going to be political.
Thank you, William, and highlighting those points that are on some side more optimistic, more pessimistic. I'd like to open the ground for questions on what you've heard today. Any precisions that you would like to have, or questions to ask on this topic of access to energy? Normally the first question is yes. We have one from Marcos.
Thank you. Well, I have a question for Rick, that I know him well because we met in 2017. And I don't know if you have made the numbers of what your project. Your project is very impressive, and the way you're growing up, the project is also very impressive. But I don't know if you have made the numbers of related to lumens, to per unit of lumens, because I live in Africa also for 5 years, and I ended reading books on a candle also, and so at the end, if you convert money spent per unit of lumen, that's a tremendous number. I guess, but probably you know it better.
Thank you for that question. With the and that really feeds into like the product, how the products have improved over time. Like the current solar lights on the market, they're like at least 10 times and even at sometimes 20 times more brighter than for the same amount that people would spend on a candle. So there's a massive improvement there. But what is even greater about it is that it's not dangerous anymore. Because with candles and with kerosene, lives are at risk. Like a candle, when it being tipped over, it's like it causes so much destruction. And we have actually had...
You can compare with a
Yes.
candle here.
And we actually had some of our solar lights coming back burned because a neighbor was still not using the solar light, right? So it's like it's still happening every single day. Yeah.
Does that respond your question? Thank you for asking. Any other question? I'm aware not all of you are very familiar with these topics. The rest of this Innovation Summit is mainly about the 4 billion people having access to energy. We're here on the 3 billion people having access to very poor energy solutions. But maybe your curiosity will... Yeah, we have a question here on the left.
Hi, my name is Matt. I work for the UN. I work in regions that are particularly impacted by people facing the hard edge of climate change, typically typhoons and cyclones in Africa, in the Philippines, all over the world. There's a missing link that I see many times with these products, where companies can really engage with people. We shouldn't be doing this primarily from a philanthropic point of view. We should be looking at solutions to empower the biodiversity, which the people that need these solutions are the stewards of. And without this biodiversity, our lives are going to be severely impacted. I don't know if you realize this, but we can make really cool products which actually make our lives far more secure. For example, the clean cooking solution is one which has massive potential for business. And you will create forests, mangroves, huge quantities of biodiversity by making and selling that device. And you will have two key sales points if somebody can innovate that device, which are like magic in terms of climate change. And there are real fantastic access to market points with the SDGs. And you can find them and you can make money. And you can create a future for life on Earth at the same time. Do you have any ideas as well to innovate the way forward for the future of our economy and the biodiversity of life on Earth?
Wow, thank you so much. I might take a first crack on that one. Thank you so much for your input on that. And you know, you're completely right. There's tremendous amount of potential in developing countries. Like they're going to go down the same path that we have all gone down. So even all the things that are being shown and presented here today, one day we'll make it there. And some of them sooner than later. But on the topic of stoves, like you mentioned, I think it really comes down to a combination of like breaking down barriers for the customers. So if you can find a way how to do that, then it becomes then it goes really fast, right? Because then the customers themselves can come up with the money. But sometimes that's has to be a hybrid model. So if the cooking stoves, for instance, the upfront investment of it is currently maybe too high, then you could have strategic partners coming in who take care of that upfront investment, but then afterwards a local party who takes care of the business model on top of that. Because that business model then can provide the maintenance, like you mentioned earlier, which is really crucial. Not only maintenance, but then also to scale the project and make it bigger.
Maybe just to add to that, I really like it that you say that it should not be like a philanthropic reason that we're involved in this. It should make business sense. I mean, if it eventually doesn't make business sense, will it actually have the sustainable impact that we're after? I mean, I would really like not to be sitting here anymore in 10 years because simply the job is not needed anymore. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I think energy's always been subsidized. I think that there's a huge part of the population that we're talking about that may not be able to afford things on a business, purely commercial basis. So I think we need to keep that in mind, that there's always going to be marginal populations that are not a opportunity to build businesses around. They also need to be considered. On the question of climate, I mean, I think the other thing to keep in mind, because I completely agree with you about deforestation or afforestation in this case, right? These are also the communities that are the most climate vulnerable. Oftentimes, the ones who have no electricity today. They're the ones who are probably going to suffer the worst as climate change accelerates. And one of the beauties, I think, of the technologies that we're talking about and the business models that we're talking about here today is that arguably they're the most climate resilient. And so, when you look at big infrastructure with major, generation plants, massive transmission and distribution infrastructures, as the climate change progresses, those are going to become more vulnerable to disruption. As cybersecurity becomes more of an issue, they're going to be more open to disruption. So when you can create a distributed network of energy infrastructure, that becomes much more resilient to those types of impacts. So I think the climate piece of this is really important from a number of different aspects.
I would like to add one final note to that. I think also what we should realize is that people in developing countries, they can leapfrog. So they use the latest products of that we're using here, and they miss out on all the little steps in between, and I think that's also really.
Yeah, that's a good image, that they went directly from nothing to mobile phone, from no electricity to solar energy. That's
fiber.
Yeah, fiber. We've time for maybe one last question, if there is any. Thank you for asking, by the way. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Mustafa Bandar from Schneider. First of all, I take my hat off to you guys. I think the work that you guys are doing is absolutely admirable. So thank you very much. Question to you, Rick, I guess. The work that you're doing, what is the roadblocks to scalability on those kind of things? You mentioned, it seems from a deployment point of view, and my own son does some work in Africa and he runs courses and training for entrepreneurs, for startups and so on. So I have some experience of that through my own family. In terms of deploying that and to go from 50,000 to 100,000, what are the main roadblocks that you're getting? And you mentioned, William, about the political situations that have impact on that as well. So what's the way out? How can we shortcut this? That's really my question.
Thank you so much, and that's a really important question. Look, we're serving some of the poorest people on Earth, and that's not necessarily something that gives an investor confidence for a start. That we're targeting poor people, but it's been so access to finance has been really difficult, and also the location. Like I've had to explain to a lot of people that Madagascar is not a movie, and so when it's a long way to go, right? Like between like explaining what we do and getting the entire context of how it works. And you're like I said, you have experience through your son of a bit of what's going on, but it's still lacking a lot. And I feel like if we want to do this properly, then we need to accept that there needs to be capital made available on basis of not like an already very big track record, or sometimes also just on small successful experiments. Because it's only by now that we've built up a proven track record. We've for the last 3 years doubled every year our revenues and the number of lights we're renting out. It's been really, really tough, and I at times would have wished indeed that at times we would have had a bit more help earlier on, and I think we would have already been a lot bigger. But thank you so much for making that really important point.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think a couple of things. What can we do? One is access to finance is definitely a main roadblock. I think looking at subsidy, results-based finance is one example where you can crowd in commercial finance to the sector that's currently missing because of the high risk profile or lack of knowledge about the sector. There are other financial tools that can mitigate risk. I think aggregation of these distributed projects into a securitized bundle that you can take to capital markets. We need to be able to access those capital markets much more than we are today. The other thing I would say that we're working a lot on right now is sort of integrating centralized, decentralized, public-private approaches. Those are very separate right now. You have the grid, you have the off-grid, and they very rarely work together. And so we're starting to see, however, some efforts to try and bring them together to help them understand that they can be mutually beneficial to one another, so that we can ultimately, accelerate access to electricity, but by integrating those types of systems in a more thoughtful, strategic way. I think that's also really important.
Thank you. I have to apologize, we reached the end of the time, and I understand the organizing team is quite strict on this. I would like to invite anyone interested in those topics to liaise with the panelists. We're going to stay here. So if you have further questions or whatever, don't hesitate. We'll remain here for at least a couple of minutes. We'd like to thank all the panelists for their time, sharing their experience. That was very, very fruitful, I hope, that now you know more about access to energy and that you would wish to get engaged, helping us in that nice cause. And maybe I would like to invite you to applaud our panelists for their sharing today.